how do you do the right thing, so to speak, in order to ensure your success as you get older. Now, as we get into this pandemic culture, what's been interesting about it is, people talk about, well, as hard as things have been, especially for young people with the distance, not being able to see their friends as much, all the kind of being cut off from people, again, friends, whether it's been socially through activities, things like that, that it builds resilience. The interesting part is that, we're it kind of does on one hand, but the other part of it is that we're also doing the same thing that we've always done, which is trying to ensure some type of safety or certainty. So while pre-pandemic, the focus on safety and certainty
Right.
was
So
about, how do
can you just
we,
kind of
how do we hit the right
like
grades or scores or things like that. The uh, the pandemic part of things is that
okay.
we're still trying to keep things safe and secure and consistent. And what's difficult about that is that we can't quite kind of figure out what if things aren't safe. And that's, again, the purpose of this talk, is because the world in general has never really been a safe or fair place,
Right.
no matter how hard we try to address that. And as important as much as we should try to address that, can't ever really get to that point of assuring safety and security. So we have to understand our cultural kind of impact and involvement in what is our culture doing to continue to permeate the ideas of safety and security, which then goes to the point of what's the purpose of parenting. Because if we think about parenting and helping kids grow into adults, really kind of now there's still kind of in my view, kind of two schools of thought on it. A lot of parents would say that the purpose is to make sure that my kid looks as good as they can on paper the day they graduate high school, so that they can get into the best college that they can, because that will ensure their success. Or parents will say, well, I want to make sure I can raise a kid that can be an adaptive and independent adult on the day they graduate high school. But the reality is you can't have it both ways as a parent. And the reason why I say that is because if a parent's goal is to say, I want to raise my kid to be an adaptive and independent adult, well, that's going to mean that they're probably going to have a bad semester or a bad school year. They're going to struggle socially. They're not going to make sports teams. They're not going to do well in band or whatever the case is. And they're going to have a hard time with their friends. That's going to impact some of these other things. And as a parent, how are we working with kids to be able to coach them through it? And because the coaching them through it will help develop those skills of being adaptive and independent, but they're not going to look as good on paper. And as parents, are we comfortable with that? And that's why I think we have to ask our question as a parent of what's our strategy? What are, who are we trying to raise? And so as a parent, I think these are questions that we have to really be comfortable answering, because if we can't answer which one we want, it's going to really make us create some inconsistent situations when we interact with our kids, especially when important things come up. So when we talk about, so we have the kind of what's the purpose of the parenting, we have culture, and then we have to talk about anxiety. Now, I mean, obviously, as a clinician, I mean, there's definitely anxiety disorders. There's definitely things that are clinically significant when it comes to anxiety. But, in a general sense, anxiety has been a really demonized word. Everyone gets anxious. The reality is anxiety is not that bad. I have talked to, thousands of adults to given different presentations and, all these things all over, kind of the Chicagoland and other states. And I have not met one person who has never been anxious. I have never met one person who says that they live a completely worry-free, stress-free, blissful life. Anxiety exists in adulthood, whether you want it to or not. And when we think about anxiety, we spend so much time and energy making sure our kids don't feel anxious. Yet as adults, we know they're always going to be anxious. We're always anxious. We're not going to get rid of it. So how are we going to normalize this feeling as a way that can be used as an adaptive skill going forward? Because we've got to stay in tune with how we feel, regardless if it's good or bad. Most people also talk about the value of emotional intelligence. When we talk about emotional intelligence, as parents, most parents say, yes, emotional intelligence is very important for my kids to learn. But parents are okay with their kids experientially feeling things like, happiness and excitement. Those positive emotions are okay for them to experience. They don't want kids to experience things like anxiety, grief, shame, disappointment, embarrassment. That's emotional intelligence too. And so if we're going to value emotional intelligence, we have to value the negative emotions just as much as we value the positive, so that we can then create help a young person grow up into someone who's cohesive, emotionally to be able to balance all of these things and actually really be emotionally intelligent as they go into adulthood. So, so again, when we think about being anxious, we work so hard about eliminating anxiety from kids' lives, but the reality is the more we work to eliminate anxiety, it's not helping them develop emotional intelligence. So this is just kind of the framework when we think about culturally from a strategic parenting perspective, and then just negative emotions. These things all kind of come together in the background now of what's going to help kids be successful as they get older, because all of these things will go hand in hand, as you'll see in a second. So, when we start, when we think about then future, right? One of the things that we talk about is, and the focus tends to be about college. And because, when people talk about where they want their kids to go to college, again, we're talking about this idea that there's a road to success, there's a path. And if a kid is on the right path, they get to the right school, then it's going to lead them to be successful in life and, yes, eliminate future anxieties because they'll be financially stable and secure, which is great for parents to want. Most parents don't say they want their kids to go to a certain college because of the quality of the education. They want them to go because of the security that they believe it gives. And so, but we have to ask the question: then, is all this work to try to eliminate all this stress? Does where someone go to college matter? Especially in the context of financial security and and financial success in the future. So these people did a study about it, and what they basically looked at were people that went to what's considered an elite university, the Ivy Leagues, Duke, Stanfords, et cetera, of the world, as opposed to a non-elite university, which was everywhere else. So what they found is that those who went to an elite university could expect to earn about 7% more over the course of their lifetime than those who went to a non-elite school, which is why most parents push for the better schools. But then what they did was they looked at a different breakout of the sorry, of the participants, and they looked at everybody who went to a non-elite school but applied to an elite one and didn't go. So maybe they got accepted and just couldn't attend for whatever reason. Maybe they got rejected. But they looked at people who went to a non-elite school and applied to an elite one and did not attend. And what they found is that with this group of people, the earnings difference disappeared. There was no longer an earnings difference. And what the researchers ultimately found is that the average SAT score of schools that students applied to and did not attend was more than twice as great a predictor of future earnings than the average SAT score of the schools that they actually attended. So I'll say that again. The average SAT scores of schools that students applied to and did not attend was more than twice as great a predictor of future earnings than the average SAT scores of the schools that they actually attended. So what did this mean? Basically what it meant from the researchers found that it was the motivation and determination of the kids themselves that determine their futures, not the schools that they actually attended. And what was interesting is that a couple of years ago, I was talking about the study with a physician who works over at DuPage Medical Group, and I didn't know her educational background at all, and she does a lot talking about child development and things too. And I was telling her about this, and she said, they're right. She said, I went to Princeton. And I work with a lot of fantastic physicians that went to, start off in community college, and we're all doing the same thing, making the same money. And that's kind of the point. It's the motivation and determination of the kids. So we spend so much time and energy on these objective outcomes about did you not get into a certain school or hit a certain grade or whatever the case is. It's not whether or not kids actually get into the school. It's whether they want to. And I think as parents, we have to really kind of start teasing those pieces out. How do we help our kids start developing that curiosity, that motivation to want to always be better, to push themselves? And it should help parents feel better too, because it's not whether or not they get in. It's about whether or not kids want to. And we put so much control into these faceless admissions people that we're saying are going to determine our kids' futures, when the reality is that the internal drive and motivation of our own kids is what's going to determine their future. So we have a lot more control over that as parents than it feels like, and that our culture tells us that we do, but we haven't. And so I think it's really important to remember that, especially as we get anxious about kind of the future pieces of for our kids and what happens for them going forward. So I want to talk a little bit about this book too. If you haven't heard of it, this book is outstanding. Called The CEO Next Door. These people did massive amounts of research interviews of over, like it says, 2,600 people, tens of thousands of surveys, and what they wanted to do is put together a book of what makes correlates to successful leaders. They said, when most people think about CEOs, people think about the CEO of like a Fortune 500 company. The odds of being a CEO of a Fortune 500 company is like 1 in 250,000. But in America, where small business employees like 85% of the people, the odds of being a leader in of an organization of 5 or more employees is 1 in 50. And so the purpose is, a lot of young people can find themselves in a leadership role really quickly. And so the question then is, well, what are the correlates to success? And so they wanted to talk about some of those things. So one of the first things I'll talk about actually are some of the myths to success. So one of the myths that they talk about is that a major professional catastrophe can derail someone's career. Major professional catastrophe being defined as being fired, laid off, making a decision that costs the company millions of dollars. What they found is that a major professional catastrophe did not derail someone's career. But what was interesting is that the perception of the catastrophe did. Those who experienced the major professional catastrophe and defined it as a failure, just a hard stop in their professional road, were 7 times less likely to move forward than the people who viewed their failure as, a mountain to climb or hurdle to get over, just another obstacle to learn from. Those who continue to view the professional catastrophes as something that was going to be, again, just a learning experience. That attitude and perspective was extremely correlated to people moving forward. And again, when we think about young people, we think a lot about being, a lot about precision and accuracy when it comes to decision making, et cetera. It's okay to get kids comfortable with things not, with just being wrong and moving forward, because that perspective, again, because, when a lot of times when people get laid off, it's not under their control, it's factors beyond their own control. So how are they going to recover from it? Well, they're not going to recover. They're not going to have the skill to recover from it magically. We've got to teach it. And we teach it through just making sure that kids understand that everything is a process. It's like, I don't know if you've read the book or seen the movie. One of my favorite books, though, is The Martian, with Matt, movie with Matt Damon. And one of the major theme of that book is that he solves a problem only to create 2 others. And his thing is, if I just keep solving the problem in front of me, I get to go home. That's the point. And that's really what kind of life is. You never eliminate the problems, but if you have the attitude that if you keep solving the problems, you get to where you want to go. And so it's that type of mindset that is really important when it comes to, again, helping kids kind of move through some of these dynamics. Next one is educational pedigree. The idea that where someone goes to college correlates to high performing of the leader that they were. What they found during the course of their surveys of the high performing leaders is about 7% of them had an Ivy League education, 8% of them had no college at all, and everybody else was everywhere in between. So the idea that where people go to school is going to is going to generate a high performing leader, again, just is not true. Now, some correlates to success. One was adaptability. Leaders who were labeled with this trait were more than 7 times as likely to be labeled as high performing. And adaptability is what it sounds like. Can you adapt to change? How often are you, if things aren't going your way, are you just changing how you need to? And again, when we think about, with kids, a lot of the messages that we give are how things have to be fixed, have to go in a certain way. Always stay on the right road, that there really is no adjustments. We want kids to be conscientious, which is great on one hand, but at the same time, when we have kids be so conscientious that they can't adapt, that creates a whole separate, there's more research on that I could talk about at a longer presentation. But we don't want kids to be so conscientious that they can't adapt, because it's great to have conscientiousness, have a plan, have all these things in place, but if they can't adapt, it doesn't really matter. So, but again, adaptability, being able to change as necessary. Next one is velocity of decision making. Leaders who are identified with this trait were more than 12 times as likely to be labeled as high performing. Now, notice, and velocity of decision making is how it's defined, the speed in which one can make a decision. Now, it's not the speed of making the correct decision or a right decision or a perfect decision. It's a decision. Over the course of their study, they found that of the CEO dismissals that occurred, 2/3 of them occurred because of indecision, not poor decision. because ultimately indecision is paralyzing. And so, so just being able to decide something, to be able to move forward, is important. It's not about whether or not it's a perfect decision. And again, we put so much value on accuracy and precision with kids and their decisions. We put more value on that than just the decision making itself. And you can see how the decision velocity of decision making and adaptability go hand in hand. If you make a decision and you're wrong, you adapt, right? And these things just kind of keep going. And the more in the speed in which you keep making decisions to move forward, eventually you're moving forward and that process moves forward. But if you're not comfortable making a decision, or you feel like your decision has to be perfect, then you're frozen. You're not going anywhere because you're too afraid. And ultimately, too, as a sidebar study, there was a study that they talked about the idea of maximizing a decision versus maximizing a decision, meaning spending the time to find a perfect decision versus satisficing a decision, just kind of making a good enough one. And basically what the difference is that, like, if you wanted to find if you want to read like a mystery book, let's say, and you go on Amazon and you want to find the perfect mystery book, right? So you search all the books and you read the plot lines and you read the reviews and you spend 10 days and you find the perfect book. And then you find the book and you read the book, your reaction to the book is like, yeah, that's pretty good. Versus if you satisfice a decision, so you want to find a mystery book, you go on Amazon, spend like 15 minutes or so, you find the book, you read the book, the odds are your reaction is going to be, hey, that's pretty good. Because ultimately the time and energy you put into making the decision, it wasn't that much. And so therefore you enjoyed the book. But if you're putting so much energy and effort to try to make a perfect decision, people tend to be disappointed anyway. So it actually makes you less happy to try to make more perfect decisions, because typically you're going to be disappointed because you just spent so much emotional energy trying to make the decision in the first place. You didn't actually get to where you wanted to go. So, that's just a sidebar kind of study on it. But again, it goes to the fact that there's a lot of benefit to speed of decision and just moving forward and not getting hung up into trying to be perfect. And again, going along with the fact, again, that high performing leaders are about 12 times as likely to be labeled as high performing when they're able to do that. Last one this study talks about is reliability. Leaders who are identified with this trait are more than 15 times as likely to be labeled as high performing. And reliability is defined for the purposes of their study as someone just being consistent, giving their best every day. They're very predictable. You know what to expect. And they're going to give their best every day. And so, again, when we think about things like reliability, it's that, again, it goes to that internal motivation. I mean, you can see how, when we talk about, when they talk about the college study about motivation, determination being a defining factor in what is going to help kids be successful into adulthood, not college attended, you can see how it pairs well with reliability, because someone with that kind of, background of being reliable is going to want to push themselves because they're motivated and they're determined. So these things all go hand in hand. But we don't tend to focus on these things, because as much as we believe that these traits are valuable and that they exist and that they're necessary for kids, we also tend to rely on what's your SAT score, how many activities are you doing, what schools are you applying to. We tend to go to this place where everyone's competing in the same kind of realm, but the reality is that none of these things are ultimately going to be predictive. And so again, when we think about what are things that are really going to help kids be successful, it goes well beyond just what a number on a page is, and it's going to be a lot more about some of these internal traits. Last one that I'll talk about, Pat Lencioni, who writes a lot of great business leadership books. He wrote a book called The Ideal Team Player. One of the main point that he talks about in his books as related to high performing leaders is humility. And I want to pair that with the other ones from the CEO Next Door, because when we talk about humility, the ability to, for someone, it's not just about being humble. I mean, people think about humility in the course of being humble. Obviously, you don't want to, inflate yourself or present yourself in a way that's going to turn people off, or, kind of seem like you can't do anything wrong. That's a part of it. The other part, though, of humility is also knowing what you're good at. It's also knowing and feeling good about the areas where you're strong, the areas where you can excel, and being able to identify those and being able to push yourselves in those areas also. So when we take the traits of adaptability, decision making, reliability, humility, you put them together. There's a lot of research and a lot of things that back up the fact that this group of traits is much more strongly correlated to success and to adulthood, success in a tangible and intangible sense. beyond what we typically define as success, which is, again, typically, well, what school did you go to? What did you get in your SATs? And as parents, I think that's important because, when we think about, what we want our futures for our kids to have, we have more control than we think, because we're the ones who develop these traits. But we've also, as parents, have to kind of get through the noise of the culture, the noise of what, educational systems, colleges, all those other people say, and actually believe this. Because a lot of parents, I think, a lot of parents I've talked to anyway, inherently say that they know it, but it's really not reinforced culturally. So, which is why I think it's just really important to keep those things in mind. Just as a kind of last point, I think I can read this because my sidebar screen is, I don't know if you can all see it. American culture has increasingly emphasized high expectations and following your dreams, things that feel good when you're young. However, the average mature adult has realized that their dreams might not be fulfilled unless happiness is the inevitable result. Mature adults in previous eras might not have expected so much, but expectations are now so high they can't be met. This is kind of what is kind of out there for our young people. We've kind of have things set up where there's an expectation that things should happen quickly and easily. We've really kind of set things up for kids that young ages that saying, look, as long as you say and do all the right things, by the time you're in your mid-20s, you're going to hit your peak, and you're going to ride that peak into retirement, and it's going to be very easy and everything's going to be okay. And it's just flat out not true. It's the biggest hoax we're selling kids. Reality is most people don't peak in their careers until, typically they're, mid 50s, and then that's kind of it. And then you ride it out. And even if you do it that way, there's definitely still going to be hardships. I haven't, whether it's through our own fault or not. So to say that there's some kind of way or path to fulfill your dreams quickly, easily at a young age, and that's something that we can do and control, is not the right message for young people. We might want that for them. I think every parent probably does, because it definitely sounds good and takes the worry off of our own shoulders. But the reality is that it's just not something that's really going to be possible. So, so to keep in mind that, as it's more about preparing kids for the real life of adulthood that we know, which is not stress-free, which is not blissful. It has its share of hardships. And are we preparing our kids for that life, or are we actually telling our kids there's a way to beat that and they don't have to experience stress? And if you're doing that, then I think you really have to question how accurate you are, and ask yourselves how many other adults have been able to figure that out, because I certainly haven't found any, and I don't think anybody else has. So, I really think about it in that perspective. So just kind of wrap up, and then I'll take some questions. Stress and anxiety are a part of life. Not getting rid of it. It's not going away. So as a parent, how are we working to help our kids integrate these things into their lives rather than eliminate it? Kids are best served by exposure to these emotions, not shielded from them. Again, there's got to be a way for us to be able to, we want our kids to be emotionally intelligent. Well, you know what, if the kids get caught with their hand in the cookie jar and they feel ashamed, well, sometimes you just got to feel ashamed. Sometimes you just got to feel bad. And it's not about being punitive, but it's about understanding the connection internally to these emotions. Because if we want kids to make positive decisions as they get older, we want them to be motivated by how they feel internally by the decisions they make. And if they can't internalize negative emotions and put cause and effect together, it's going to be really hard for them to lean on these experiences to make good decisions in the future. And again, success is not determined by test scores or college attended. It's determined by motivation, initiative, decision-making, adaptability. There's a lot more I can talk about on the initiative side as well. But again, the correlates to success into adulthood go well beyond just GPAs and college attended. It goes by developing these internal traits. So that's kind of the overview of why it's important to kind of build in and go through the the development of the character traits, because those traits are typically learned through hardship. And if we can get kids comfortable with going through the process of hardship, it gets them better prepared in real life. So I do. So with that, I can't see. I don't know if anyone else is. Oh, here we go. I lost my my mouse. Oh, here we go.
Okay.
I don't know, or if you want to take it over, I can't see my mouse, so I can't click on. If you want to take the screen off, I'd be happy to
You're
take any
off,
questions.
Yep. So we've got your presentation off.
Oh, here we go.
Back to seeing all of our little boxes here. Thank you for that message. And at this time, if anybody has any questions, please either unmute yourself and ask, or we've got a chat box that we're taking a look at too. So if you want to put anything in the chat, I guess Adam, my question for you might be, in your practice, what are you seeing because of what kids have gone through the last 10 months? So they haven't been in school. You talked so much about adaptability and needing that skill. I think in today's pandemic world, that's especially true now. What have you been seeing, and has that
Well,
piece look like?
yeah, it's an interesting one because, again, like we spent so much. It's why I brought up the culture piece at the beginning. We spent so much time pre-pandemic, and we have to think about what we were doing to kids. Pre-pandemic, we were focused on overscheduling kids, too many activities, too many things to do, focusing on all the wrong reasons why they were doing them, trying to get them off screens. That was the pre-pandemic culture. So what happened was we took these kids that we and that which that we were building to be highly conscientious kids, right? Again, driven, right roads, structure, very clear line from A to B to C that they were following, that they were just fine, kind of running around and connecting those dots. Research shows that when conscientious people suddenly don't have a plan, their happiness levels drop 120% relative to those who are not conscientious. That's what's happening now. So the kids who were so conscientious, who were so dependent on that structure, had it taken away from them completely. Everything that they did for years was gone. So now you have kids who didn't previously have mental health issues having them because they were told for so long this is the only way to do it. And now that it's gone, they really think, what am I going to do? And so what we see in the practice I work with a kid who historically, high achiever, athlete, honor student, wound up in the hospital because she cut herself, almost, cut her artery, almost killed herself. Now, has, and then so self-injury now is on the radar. And so much of it is because the conscientiousness that they had, that was such a strength, became immediately a huge weakness. And so, which is why when we think about which is why I go back to the strategy as a parent, what are we trying to do? Because as an adult, we know that just because we do all the right things does not ensure any type of guaranteed success. So, so I think, as a parent, I think we have to think about, we want kids to be conscientious. We want them to make the right decisions and think things through. But at the same time, is it really catastrophic if it doesn't work? And how often are we really trying to balance those things out? And I think that's what a lot of kids are struggling with. The ones who just were leaning so much on this structure that just got taken away from them completely. Those are the ones I think having the hardest time. And that's what I know for the young people, that's what we've been seeing.
Thanks for
Any
that.
other questions?
Hi, Adam. Yeah, this is Grace. I was just wanting to ask from your perspective. I'm both a parent and, in the education system as well. And kind of like was mentioned, this conversation would have been probably very different than it would have been a year ago now. So given where we're at in this time in history, and so many of our students and kids who, like you said, have been high achievers and now are experiencing more challenges, both I'm thinking systemically in the school system where I work, and at home. How does that process start? Like what, are there systemic changes that we can put in play to support kids? I think as parenting, as you mentioned, there's a lot that we can do in just a mind shift. But where do we start, I guess, or some ideas on that would be great.
Yeah, it's interesting. I worked, there's a few schools that I've worked with over the past few years that, have brought me in. I've had a lot of conversations, like lunch and learns and things with different teachers or instructional coordinators and things like that. And, really talking about kind of within their own, within the, because every school system is different. I mean, as much as it's, education, every community is different, schools are different. So I don't believe that there's, like one way to do it. But what's interesting about it is, the teachers that I've spoken with over time, I think it's fair to say agree with what I'm saying, and they talk a lot about systemically. Well, how do you balance that? Because we're evaluated off of grades or this or that. I mean, so what we talk a lot about is within the whatever system or district that they're in, how do you on one hand you can't the measuring of kids is not going away, but at the same time, I think that there's ways in which to play with that within a system that teachers can be, I think, a little bit more autonomous on, especially if they put these things first, right? So for example, if you have a teacher that says, I really want to highlight, trying to build the reliability trait in kids, right? So that goes to, well, then what does that mean for kids who turn in late homework assignments? How am I going to handle that maybe differently than I would previously, right? Or, or highlighting, different things of somebody who maybe, it's not just about turning in a homework late, but maybe they're doing some other things in class that just demonstrates that trait. And how am I going to bring that more to the forefront more often? So I think, every system functions differently from the schools I've talked to, but in every system I've spoken with, there's ways in which to really highlight these things if the system is invested in bringing these traits out. Because, I was sitting like District 2 or 3, I know a few years ago, I was on the SEL committee when they were integrating, the SEL into the system, and they have a really good program. My statement there was always SEL is fantastic, but until it takes on the same type of weight as here's our district-wide SAT scores, it's still going to be looked at as secondary. So systemically, how do we value these things that we say are valuable? We know they're valuable. We know it. There's a ton of research that backs it up. I mean, just that, what was it? Angela Duckworth's Grid is like the first kind of, main book about just the growth mindset, which is really what this all kind of boils down to. We all know it's true, but somehow we're not very comfortable leaning on it when it comes to evaluation of kids and kind of how they're doing. Obviously trying to measure their knowledge is important, but there's other pieces that I think are important. So I know it's not an exact answer to your question, but but I know in talking with systems that when systems are invested, there's different ways of doing it. And I've worked with public and private schools, and when systems are invested, there's definitely ways to bring these things out.
And in all fairness to Adam, I have to tell you that typically this is at about an hour in-person presentation, and it gets way more in depth, and he goes into his TED Talk. But we told him that we have found the sweet spot with our educational series on Zoom is about 40 minutes. So we said, Adam, we need you to do it in 30 minutes instead of 60 minutes. And then we'll have 10 minutes for Q&A. So we cut a lot of his slides out, but I'm hoping that you guys got a good enough flavor of what, Adam's message was tonight. And if we have a couple more minutes, is there anybody else who has a question? No?
It doesn't look like it. I'm going to take this one final moment just to share that tonight's Adam's talk tonight was being recorded. And so if you wanted to, if this message was helpful to you, you want to share it with someone else, it will be available probably by tomorrow or Friday on our Kids Matter website. So if you just want to visit the Kids Matter website, under events, you'll see importance of failure and a link to be able to watch the video of tonight. If there's anybody that you just want to say, hey, you really should hear this message, it's a good one. So if there's no other comments at this time, we're just going to go ahead and wrap up. And Adam, thank you once again for sharing this message. Thank all of you for attending, and we're glad to have you here. Keep up on Kids Matters website and follow us on social media to find out. We've got another educational series coming up in February, March. So just take a look there to see what we're doing. And we appreciate you all being here tonight.
And I'll just throw in too, if you enjoyed it, I did write a book called Unwritten Rules that is available on Amazon. Kind of used a lot of short story narratives that I've worked with clinically over the years, and compiled into a book kind of along these same messages. So if you're curious, you can check it out. Unwritten Rules. It's on Amazon.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Those short
Thanks.
stories, Adam, and you're working with kids or just anecdotally?
So the stories I put together were, thematic. Some of it has been my work with kids. Some has just been family narrative and theories. But the idea was, really just how to show some real world situations that families go through, that they struggle with, and why these everyday situations are so important from a strategic perspective as a parent, so that we're not flying by the seat of our pants, that we know that we're able to make decisions as a parent for a long-term purpose, not just for getting through that short-term pain.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, guys. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all. Good night.
Thanks. Take care.
Bye, guys. Bye.